I'm Marisol Vega, 34 head chef and owner of La Senda, a restaurant you've probably never heard of unless you read the back pages of Michelin's latest guide. The whole house smelled like cinnamon and grease, like it always did on Thanksgiving. My mother's roast turkey, my aunt's casseroles, my cousin's pies. Everything lay heavy on the long oak table. I'd offered to help weeks ago, but my mom had said, "This is tradition. Marie, you know that." So I brought dessert, quietly. A delicate, dark chocolate tart with orange blossom ganache and toasted hazelnut crust. Something I'd made over a dozen times for my menu. Something that once made a Parisian food critic close his eyes and whisper, "Mon Dieu." But here, in my childhood dining room, it sat on the sideboard untouched, wedged between a grocery store pumpkin pie and one of those Jell-O salad nightmares my cousin Tanya still insisted on making. I stood next to the piano, out of the way. The room buzzed with clattering forks, clinking glasses, and overlapping conversations. My cousin Julian was reenacting some TikTok skit. The kids were screaming with laughter. My uncle laughed too hard at his own jokes, and my mother kept adjusting the thermostat as if the air could fix the awkwardness between us. Then I heard it. "She's always doing something weird with her food," Tanya said, loud enough. "Remember when she tried to make that lavender mashed potato thing, like, why?" Laughter. I blinked and looked down at my hands. My nails were short, my fingers worn with years of burns and blisters and garnishing thousands of plates with tweezers. These were the hands that once chopped onions for 16 hours straight during opening week. The hands that trembled before my first Michelin inspector visit. I glanced at my tart. Still untouched. I picked it up quietly and began walking it back to the kitchen. No one noticed. Then a voice behind me, not a family voice, not one I expected, said, "Excuse me, is that the Vega chocolate tart I turned?" A tall woman stood near the front door, half in, half out of her camel coat. My brother's friend. Maybe she had that New York energy. I didn't recognize her. But then my brother, Lucas, stood and rushed over, grinning like an idiot. "You guys, this is Chef René Dupont," he announced. "From Michelin." She was doing a piece on chefs in LA, and I told her she had to stop by if she wanted to meet my sister. Silence fell like a dropped plate. Chef Dupont stepped in fully, took the tart from my hands gently, and turned to the room. "This is her tart," she asked, looking at everyone. "This woman's dessert got a standing ovation in my test kitchen last week. You all know she just made the Michelin guide." "Right." My mom stopped adjusting the thermostat. My cousins stared. Even Julian, mid-skit, fell silent. I felt the room pivot, all eyes on me. And I wasn't holding a joke of a dessert anymore. I was holding something sacred. If you've ever had your worth ignored by the people who raised you, but still kept showing up with love anyway, drop a comment or tell me where you're watching from. Hit like or subscribe. If family dinners ever made you feel like a stranger in your own home. Renee placed the tart down on the center of the table and gestured toward the forks. "You don't know what you've been missing." The silence didn't last long, but for once, it belonged to me. They didn't say much after that, at least not to me. Everyone started digging into the tart like it was some kind of holy relic. A hush fell over the table again, but this time it wasn't the awkward kind. It was reverent, even confused. My mother looked down at her fork, then at me, as if searching for some proof that the daughter she'd raised had actually made something worthy of a stranger's praise. Did you make this from scratch?" she finally asked, voice low, guarded. I just nodded. Chef Dupont stood beside me, smiling like a proud aunt. I'd barely spoken to her before that night, just once during a feature shoot in downtown LA. She hadn't told me she was coming, I think she knew. I think Lucas must have said something. Maybe told her how nobody back home really got what I did. Maybe warned her I'd be in the corner, half invisible, like always. Tanya scraped the last of her slice clean and looked up at me with a tight smile. Okay, I get it now. This is really good. It was the closest I'd get to an apology. I didn't stay long after that. I packed up my knives, hugged the kids goodbye, and told Lucas I'd text him later. My mom didn't say anything when I left. She didn't need to. I'd grown up with that silence. I knew it like a second skin. On the drive back to Silver Lake, I rolled the windows down and let the wind take the starch out of my chef's coat. The streets were empty, storefronts shut, turkeys picked over. I turned the radio off and let the silence settle in. That kind of silence feels different than the one at the dinner table. It doesn't punish you. It holds you. It's the kind of quiet you earn after surviving another holiday, where people pretend you're someone else or worse. Nobody at all. My first kitchen job wasn't even supposed to happen. I was 17, working weekends at a bakery called Pan Dulce on 4th and Soto, mostly cleaning floors, boxing conchas, and restocking jam jars for the tourists who thought sweet bread was exotic. But one morning, the line cook didn't show. No call, no excuse. Just vanished. Mrs. Alvarez, the owner, looked at me and said, "You can flip eggs?" "Si." I nodded. I couldn't, but I wanted to. That morning, I cracked 64 eggs. 47 of them broke wrong. I burned 3 pans, forgot salt, dropped a yolk onto a customer's shoe. But I also made one perfect plate of huevos rancheros, the kind my grandmother used to make when she had leftover tortillas and was feeling generous. Mrs. Alvarez took one bite and said, "You stay. The eggs will learn you." I never forgot that. Not the grammar. Not the lesson. By the time I was 20, I was staging in LA kitchens every night after my day shifts. Free labor for a chance to watch how real chefs moved. My mother called it chasing fairy dust. She wanted me to apply to community college, learn something useful. "You could be a teacher," she'd said, "or work at the hospital front desk. That's good money." I didn't want money. I wanted heat. Fire. The rush of plating a dish with 30 seconds to spare. I wanted to make people cry from flavor. I never told her that. Instead, I worked. I showed up early, stayed late, cleaned grease traps, burned the tips of my fingers on cast iron pans, got screamed at by chefs who forgot my name, slept on a cot in the pantry at least twice a week. But there was one night that changed everything. It was during service at a tiny Basque bistro off Melrose. The sous chef sliced open his palm-prepping quail. Total mess. Chef turned to the line and barked, "Who's got her station?" No one moved. So I did. I'd been watching her for weeks. I knew her steps by heart. I tied on her apron, grabbed her mise en place, and ran her station clean through the rush. After service, Chef pulled me aside. "Where'd you learn to move like that?" I didn't say anything, just shrugged. He nodded once. "You're hired." I never told my family about that job. I was afraid they'd laugh. Or worse, ignore it. I kept my head down and saved what I could. And when I'd finally scraped together enough every tip, every spare check, I rented a tiny industrial space off Sunset and opened a supper club. La Senda. It means the path. My path. I designed the space myself. Warm wood panels, hand-thrown plates, an open kitchen so the diners could watch every sear, every garnish. I wanted the food to speak softly but deeply. I wanted it to feel like memory, like something your abuela would have made if she had tweezers and access to truffle oil. At first, nobody came. Then the food bloggers showed up, then the tourists, then the critics. And then one day, I came in and found a letter taped to the front of the fridge. Michelin. that night. I stood alone in the walk-in and sobbed into a sack of shallots. Back at home, no one mentioned it. Not the article, not the Star, not the interviews. Until Thanksgiving. Until that tart. 2 nights after the holiday, I got a call. It was my mom. "Hey," she said. Her voice sounded small, tired. She never called me first. I was cleaning up and found your old scrapbook. The one from high school, with all the little food clippings. My stomach clenched. I remembered that scrapbook. Pages of handwritten recipes, torn-out magazine spreads, Polaroids of dishes I'd tried to recreate with boxed mac and cheese and hot sauce. "You still have that?" I asked. "I never threw it away," she said. "I just didn't think it was serious. You were always playing with ingredients." I thought it was a phase. I didn't know what to say. So I waited. "You did good, Murray," she whispered. "I'm proud." The line went quiet for a second. Then she added, "I made your tart today. I followed your notes from the article. It didn't look like yours, but it tasted real. It tasted like you." Tears hit my collarbone before I felt them on my cheeks. She didn't say anything more, and I didn't need her to. After that phone call, I sat on the cold kitchen tile in my apartment, my back against the pantry door, phone still in hand. It was just past midnight. The kitchen lights were off, the only glow coming from the hallway nightlight near the bedroom. I hadn't moved in 10 minutes. The words repeated in my head like a song that wouldn't leave. "I'm proud." It was strange, not loud, not grand, but it hit like thunder. I kept replaying the way she said it, tentative, like tasting a new flavor for the first time, unsure whether it belonged on her tongue. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't even try. I grabbed a notebook and started sketching a new menu, something lighter, softer. Something that honored the messy, quiet joy I felt when I used to steal tomatoes from my grandmother's garden. The next morning, I walked into La Senda earlier than usual. The windows were still fogged from the night air. I unlocked the back door and let the scent of basil and old wood wrap around me like an apron. I tied my hair up, rolled up my sleeves, and started prepping breakfast for the staff. We didn't open until 6. But I always made them breakfast eggs. Toast. Sometimes tamales if I had the time. I didn't tell them that it made me feel safe, like I had a family again. They thought I did it because I was nice. Maybe I did. That morning, I made chilaquiles with roasted tomatillo salsa and crumbled cotija, as we ate on upside-down buckets in the back hallway. Marco, my Sue, asked, "You good, Heffa?" I nodded. "You're smiling," he added, like it was suspicious. I just shrugged. "Tired. That's all." But I wasn't tired. I was hollowed out and full at the same time, like someone had reached inside me and carved a space for something new. That week, a local podcast called Plated LA asked me to do an interview. I almost said no. I didn't love being on mic, but they promised it would be casual, just a conversation. I agreed, as long as we recorded inside the restaurant, early, before service. The host was a woman named Davina Warm Voice, big smile, eyes that asked real questions. Halfway through the interview, she asked me, "Was there a moment when you knew you made it?" I paused, and then I said something I hadn't expected to say. "It wasn't the Star," I told her. "It was Thanksgiving." Davina blinked. "You mean, just recently?" "Yeah," I said. "My mom tried my tart, and she called me. That's never happened before." "What did she say?" "That she was proud." There was a pause in the room. Davina leaned forward. "And that meant more to you than the Michelin Star." I nodded. "I've been trying to feed her for 20 years. I whispered. She finally took a bite. The episode aired the following Monday. By Tuesday morning, I had 3 missed calls from numbers I didn't recognize, and 2 DMs from food critics wanting to tell the real human story behind my rise. I ignored most of it. But then, something strange happened. People started coming into La Senda not because of the star, but because of the podcast. I had guests crying into their soup, telling me about their own families. People brought their moms, their grandfathers. One woman showed up with a scrapbook of her son's childhood art, slid it across the bar, and said, "He's a painter now." I never believed in it. Until last week. And still, my own family stayed silent. No texts, no comments, no invites. Not even Lucas. It took 2 more weeks before I saw him again. He showed up during brunch service, hungover looking, sunglasses still on indoors. "You got a second?" he asked, hanging back near the espresso station. "Make it quick." He scratched at the back of his neck. "Mom's mad." I raised an eyebrow. "At me? At everyone?" "I think. Says she felt ambushed on Thanksgiving. Says you embarrassed her." I blinked, because someone else praised me. He didn't answer. He just leaned against the wall like it was holding him up. "She's complicated. Mari, I'm not a math problem. Lucas, no, but you've always made her feel small, without trying." I stared at him. All I ever wanted was for her to see me. That's not an attack. "I know." He exhaled. "But you know how she is." I shook my head. "No, that's the problem. We all just know how she is, and we bend around it." "I'm done bending." He looked at me, then really looked, and for a second, I saw the kid he used to be, the one who made me birthday cards from printer paper and brought me lemonade when I was crying in the garage. "Come to Sunday dinner," he said. "Why, because she bought truffle oil." He smirked, and she asked how to use it. I did go. That Sunday. The air smelled the same cinnamon and grease, but this time, something else lingered. Basil. Maybe thyme. Something unexpected. My mom wore her apron, the one with the chili peppers on it, and was humming when I walked in. She didn't hug me, but she nodded toward the kitchen like we had something to do. I followed her, silently. On the counter, I saw a small plate of crostini, mushrooms, thin sliced, dressed with oil and sea salt. I picked one up, ate it, then looked at her. "You did this?" I asked. She shrugged. "I followed a YouTube. It's good. I used the oil you gave me last Christmas. I'd forgotten I'd even gifted it." I looked at her. Really looked. There were soft lines around her eyes that hadn't been there before. She was older than I remembered, but also smaller. Like all the fight had sunk into her bones and just settled. "I don't know how to say things right," she said suddenly. "You're better at that. I'm better at recipes." I smiled. "I thought if I kept you safe, close to home, you'd be okay." I didn't understand that what you needed was space. I didn't respond. She looked down at the cutting board, wiped her hands. "I wasn't proud because of some award." She continued. "I was proud because you didn't give up on yourself, even when I did." I stepped forward, gently touched her wrist. It wasn't forgiveness, not fully, but it was something. That night, I helped her finish dinner. I didn't take over. I just assisted. Passed her things, adjusted the salt. Let her move how she needed to. When we sat down to eat, no one said anything about the tart, or the star, or the podcast. But for the first time in years, I didn't feel like a guest. I felt like a daughter. And when Lucas raised his glass and said, "To Marisol, who knows how to cook and how to heal," no one laughed. They just clinked their glasses together and looked at me like I belonged. A week after that Sunday dinner, I got a letter. An actual, handwritten letter, not an email or a text. It arrived at the restaurant, addressed in tidy cursive to Chef Marisol Vega. I opened it standing behind the service counter while the espresso machine hissed behind me. It was from Mrs. Alvarez, my first kitchen. Pan dulce. I hadn't spoken to her in over a decade. She must have heard about the Michelin Star somehow. Maybe someone from the neighborhood told her. Or maybe she still walked by the old bistro and saw my name in a magazine in the window. The letter was short. Marie. I always knew. The eggs learned you. Come visit when you're free. I saved your apron. My throat tightened. I could still picture the back of that bakery kitchen, the stained walls, the cracked tiles, the rusty fan that made too much noise. That was where I first understood how a space could love you back, even when the people in it didn't have the words. Later that night, after service, I sat in the empty dining room of La Senda with a bottle of wine and my old scrapbook, the one my mother said she found. I didn't know she still had it, but sure enough, it was tucked in a brown paper bag under the seat of her car, and she handed it to me the night I left her house. Keep it safe this time, she'd said. It's got your beginning in it. I opened the first page. There it was, a wrinkled clipping of a Bon Appetit, spread from 2005 with the headline, Elevating the Humble Root Vegetable. I had highlighted the word elevating in red marker like it was a prayer. Page after page, I saw the recipes I used to obsess over. Potato galettes, tamarind glazes, homemade stock notes written in gel pen. Some pages had small grease stains from where I'd cooked with the scrapbook open next to me on the counter. My 17-year-old self had no idea what she was doing, but she knew what she wanted to create something that lasted longer than applause. I closed the book and let my eyes wander around the room. The chairs were still tucked neatly under the tables. The pendant lights above flickered gently, casting warm halos on the wood below. There were no customers, no critics, no cameras. Just me and the hum of something quiet and full in the air. This was mine, not because of the Michelin Star, but because I'd made it from nothing, from Jell-O salad and cinnamon grease, from silence and burnt eggs, from shame and stubborn joy. 2 days later, a woman walked into the restaurant just after the lunch crowd cleared out. She had short gray hair, clear-rimmed glasses, and the kind of leather handbag that said she wasn't trying to impress anyone. She asked to speak to me directly. "I'm sorry to interrupt," she said, "but my daughter gave me this address and told me I needed to come here and try your mushroom tamale." I blinked. "Of course," I said, motioning toward the counter. "We can make one fresh." She sat quietly while I prepared it myself. I could have had the kitchen handle it, but something about her face, that quiet blend of apology and curiosity, made me want to do it personally. When I brought her the plate, she looked up and said, "My daughter's name is Nina. She's in culinary school in Portland. She heard your podcast interview and said I reminded her of your mom." I froze. She said I never really supported her. The woman continued, "That I made her feel small, that I only came to things when she begged me." She picked up the tamale, took a bite, and held it in her mouth for a long time. When she swallowed, she looked up at me, eyes glassy. "I drove here from Santa Barbara. I wanted to taste what made a daughter feel seen." I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded and sat beside her. For the next 20 minutes, we didn't speak much. She ate slowly, with reverence. When she was done, she wiped her mouth carefully, stood, and reached into her bag. She pulled out a small envelope. "It's a letter to her," she said. "I'm mailing it, but I wanted you to know. You helped me write it." I took the envelope gently, not to open, but just to feel the weight of it. "Thank you," she whispered. Then she left. That night, I lay in bed, fully dressed, staring at the ceiling. The room smelled faintly of masa and citrus. My bones ached from service, but my heart felt alert. I thought of my mom. I thought of how many years we spent circling each other, her trying to protect me by taming me trying to earn her love by becoming someone she didn't recognize. I didn't know how to undo all of that, but I knew now that food could soften things we didn't have words for. So I did something I never thought I'd do. I invited her to cook with me. She showed up on a Thursday morning. No apron, no makeup. Just a plain shirt and the same leather purse she always carried. "You sure?" she asked, standing awkwardly in the doorway. I handed her an apron. "I'm not going to do anything fancy," she warned. "No foam, no microgreens." I grinned. "That's okay. We're starting with tortillas." She laughed once short and surprised. I set up the prep table with flour, water, and lard. The smell alone was enough to send me back to childhood, when she'd roll dough out with the heel of her hand and hum to herself as she worked. She didn't ask what they were for, didn't ask if they were for a dish on the menu. She just started rolling. We worked in silence, a good one this time, and when she handed me the first tortilla, perfectly imperfect. I kissed her knuckle without thinking. She looked at me and smiled, small but real. That was the moment I realized maybe recognition doesn't come all at once. Maybe it arrives in crumbs and gestures, in homemade tortillas and shared silence. Maybe that's enough. That night, I added something new to the menu. Tortilla madre wood-fired flour tortilla, smoked sea salt, lime butter, grilled nopales, sunflower crema. Underneath, a single line in italic inspired by the hands that first fed me. Customers didn't need to know what it meant, but I did. And she did too. The new dish sold out the first night. I hadn't expected that. Honestly, I thought it would sit quietly on the menu, overshadowed by the duck confit or the scallop aguachile that foodies love to post about. But it didn't. People asked about it. Some asked about the crema, some about the lime butter. One older couple asked, "Who is the mother?" as if they already knew the answer, just wanted to hear me say it out loud. And I did. "My mom," I'd say softly. "It's her tortilla recipe. She taught me this one by showing me, not telling me." They always smiled when I said that, like they could taste the story. The press picked it up a week later. La Senda's Tortilla Madre is an ode to matriarchal memory. One headline read, "Marisol Vega honors her roots." One hand-stretched tortilla at a time, read another. But what moved me most wasn't the reviews or photos. It was the way my staff treated the dish. Marco would place the tortillas gently in the basket like he was handling a newborn. Janelle, our pastry chef, started calling them the sacred ones. And after service, I once caught Lonnie, our line cook, eating one slowly, eyes closed, whispering, "Damn, that tastes like home." I didn't say anything. I just stood back and watched. It wasn't about fame anymore, or proving anything. It was about presence, about something I'd never truly had at home, not until now. Mom came in again the following Thursday. This time she brought tamales, chicken mole, wrapped tight in banana leaves instead of corn husks. "I used to make these for your dad before he left," she said casually, as if she were talking about old shoes. "Figured it's time they came out of hiding." I took one bite and just about wept. They were warm, earthy, a little spicy at the back of the throat. But more than that, they were familiar, like a song I'd forgotten I loved. "You want to plate these?" I asked. She didn't answer with words. She just stepped into the kitchen, washed her hands, and tied on an apron. That night, we ran them as a special. We didn't announce it. No social media blast, no chalkboard signs, just quietly added tamales de la casa to the bottom of the handwritten menu. Beneath it, in Mom's awkward cursive made by Rosa Vega, mother of the chef. She didn't know I added that line until after service. When she saw it, she stared for a long time. Then she walked into the kitchen, took off her apron, and without looking at me said, "That's the first time someone's put my name next to food. Besides a grocery label?" I waited. She turned, wiped her hands on a towel, and whispered, "It felt good." After that, she started coming every week. Sometimes she'd bring old recipes: mole rojo, ensalada de nopal, arroz con leche. Sometimes she just sat in the back corner booth and watched me run the kitchen. She never critiqued, never offered unsolicited advice. She just watched. One night, I caught her smiling to herself as Marco flambéed pork belly tableside. She was sipping a small glass of wine and mouthing along to the salsa track we had playing. It was quiet, unremarkable, but it meant everything. That small moment was louder than all the silence that came before it. Lucas showed up again 2 weeks later, this time with his new girlfriend, some documentary filmmaker with huge eyes and a neck tattoo that said, "Trust the fire." I liked her immediately. He leaned across the bar after dessert and said, "Mom talks about you all the time now. Says you're making her feel useful again." I laughed. She is useful. Those tamales sell better than the tuna crudo. She says she wishes she hadn't waited so long to show up. That made me pause. I looked at him. Really looked. "She did show up," I said. "That's what matters now." He nodded. "It's weird, though. Seeing her soften, I didn't think it was possible. She's not soft." I corrected. "She's just open." He stared down at his empty plate, then at the warm candle flickering between us. "You did that. You know. You made space for her." I wanted to disagree, wanted to say it wasn't about me, but I knew what he meant. We'd both been raised in a house where emotions were hidden under layers of pride, tradition, and caution. I had broken that pattern not by fighting, but by staying, by cooking, by inviting her in, by not needing an apology to make room for connection. Lucas reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. "Before I forget," he said, "she wanted you to have this." I opened it. Inside was my grandmother's gold ring, the one with the tiny ruby. I hadn't seen it in 20 years. She said, "Your hands are ready now." I swallowed hard. For a moment, I didn't feel like a chef. I felt like a daughter again. A granddaughter. Part of a line of women who cooked their feelings into dough and rice and stew, who said, "I love you" through warm plates and second helpings. I slipped the ring onto my finger. It fit perfectly. That night after close, I walked home. Didn't take a car. Didn't rush. Just let the city hum around me, the flicker of neon from taco trucks. The smell of panaderia yeast rising in the air. The faded chatter of people walking home from late shifts. I passed the bakery where I once burned 47 eggs. It was closed now. The windows boarded. The sign faded. But I stood outside it anyway, hand in my coat pocket, fingers curled around the ring. I whispered, "Gracias." Not to anyone in particular, just to the walls, the memory, the girl I used to be. Back at home, I opened my fridge and stared inside, not out of hunger, just habit. There was a container of mole from my mom, a half-eaten wheel of aged cotilla, and a bundle of herbs I'd bought from a farmer I'd known since before La Senda even existed. I pulled out a tortilla, toasted it over the flame, added a smear of mole, a slice of cheese, and a handful of chopped cilantro. A midnight taco. No garnish. No camera. Just food. I sat by the window and ate it slowly, watching the traffic lights shift from red to green to gold, and I felt finally full. Not from the tortilla, from the fact that I didn't need to prove anything anymore, not to my family, not to critics, not even to myself. Some nights still hurt. Some memories still pinch like blisters under a bandage, the ones where I stood outside the kitchen, holding a pie no one wanted, wishing someone would just see me. But those moments don't define me anymore. Now, I have a restaurant that hums with love, a mother who learned how to say my name in pride, a team that treats food like language, and hands that remember every burn, every scar, every soft gesture that built a life worth feeding. A few months later, just as spring started to press its fingerprints into the air, soft jasmine drifting through alleys, early peaches at the market, I received an invitation. It came in a thick cream envelope, the kind you'd expect a wedding invite to come in, not something addressed to a chef who still pulled double shifts and wrapped her own silverware in napkins after close. On the front, Miss Marisol Vega, La Senda, Los Angeles. Inside, a handwritten note on heavy paper embossed with a gold seal. The Culinary Institute of Los Angeles proudly invites you to deliver the keynote address at our spring graduation ceremony. We believe your journey reflects the heart of our mission to turn passion into purpose. I read it twice, then 3 more times. Me speak. The idea of standing in front of hundreds of starched white coats and their proud families made my stomach twist. I wasn't a speaker. I was a cook. I told stories in citrus and salt, not in speeches. Still, I couldn't deny the flicker in my chest, part fear, part disbelief, part something deeper I didn't have a name for. I folded the invitation and slid it into my back pocket. I wouldn't decide right away. That night, after service, I stood at the pass watching the last of the guests linger over their dessert, a roasted corn flan I'd spent weeks refining. My mom was at her usual corner booth. She'd started coming in on Friday nights now, sometimes with friends, sometimes alone. She never asked for anything special, just a glass of wine and whatever the chef was proud of that week. I walked over and sat beside her, handing her the invitation. She opened it, her fingers gentle, eyes squinting at the gold lettering. When she looked up, she didn't say wow, or you have to do it. She just asked, "Do you want to?" I shrugged. "I'm scared," I admitted. Not of talking, of being the story. She nodded slowly. "You already are the story, Misha. You just haven't heard it in your own voice yet." I said yes the next morning. The ceremony was scheduled for late May, held in a sunlit courtyard on the Institute's campus, a wide, ivy-draped plaza with folding chairs lined up in perfect rows. When I arrived backstage, I could smell bread baking somewhere nearby. It calmed me. I wore a black blazer, hair pinned up, my grandmother's ring shining faintly on my hand. From the wings, I watched graduates hug their families. Some were crying, some grinning, some dazed. I saw one young woman, maybe 21, standing alone, clutching a small box of tools. Her chef whites looked brand new, stiff at the collar. I remembered that look. I'd worn it once too, pride that hasn't yet found a place to land. When they called my name, there was polite applause. I walked to the podium, heart thudding against my ribs. I looked out at the sea of white coats and expectant faces. Then I began. "I'm Marisol Vega," I said, "head chef and owner of La Senda in Los Angeles. But before that, I was a dishwasher, a pantry cook, a girl with a scrapbook full of stolen recipes and no one to taste them." A few students chuckled. I smiled. I didn't go to culinary school. I learned in heat, in chaos, in kitchens where the AC broke and the chef screamed. I learned by burning things, by being invisible, by making terrible decisions and still showing up the next day. They were listening now, leaning forward. "But what I really want to tell you," I continued, "is that the food will teach you. It will teach you how to endure, how to forgive, how to speak without speaking." I took a breath. My mother didn't understand my dream. Not for a long time. She thought food was something you made to survive, not something you made to be seen. I carried that silence for years, tried to outrun it with perfect plates and Michelin stars. I paused again, eyes searching the crowd, until one day, she took a bite of something I made and said she was proud. The wind stirred the edge of my note cards. That moment meant more than any award, because it reminded me that food isn't about ego. It's about remembering, reconnecting, feeding others in the way we wished someone had fed us. I finished with a soft smile. May you all find your way to the table, even if it takes a long time. The crowd was still. Then someone clapped, then another, until the courtyard filled with applause, not thunderous, but full, like a warm loaf breaking open. After the ceremony, students came up one by one. Some hugged me. Some handed me crumpled business cards. One girl whispered, "I played your podcast for my mom." She finally stopped calling my dream a hobby. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, heart restless, staring at the ceiling again. But this time, it wasn't from loneliness. It was from possibility, from the echo of being heard. I got up and went into the kitchen. I pulled out flour, lard, water, and I started making tortillas. Not for service, not for a recipe, just for me, just because it felt good. A few days later, my mother and I drove out to East LA. Pan Dulce was still closed, but Mrs. Alvarez had agreed to meet us there. When she opened the door, she looked just the same. Older, maybe. A little more curved at the shoulders. But her eyes were sharp, her hands still stained with cinnamon. "Marie," she said, "you didn't forget your roots." I couldn't. I smiled. "You taught them to me." She showed us around the old space. Dust still coated the glass display case. The stove hadn't been lit in years, but it smelled the same, a ghost of sweet bread and hard work. Mrs. Alvarez handed me a box. Inside, my old apron, still stained, still folded the way I'd left it. "You keep this now," she said. "I think you earned it." My mother stood silently beside me, her hand resting lightly on my shoulder. I turned to her. "Do you want to make something?" She blinked. "Here." "Yeah," I said, one last time. So we tied our aprons and got to work. We didn't bake anything elaborate, just conchas. Simple, perfect. As they rose in the oven, I caught her humming softly, a song from my childhood, one I hadn't heard in years. And I realized this was what healing looked like. Not grand speeches, not public recognition, just dough, heat, and someone beside you who stayed. That night, we took the conchas home, shared them at the table with Lucas and his girlfriend, who brought fresh jam. We didn't say much. We didn't need to. The kitchen was warm, the plates were full, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I had to earn my seat at the table. I already had it. Summer came in slow, like it was asking permission. The jacarandas bloomed early that year, scattering purple petals across sidewalks like confetti from a celebration nobody remembered starting. Inside La Senda, the light shifted brighter, harsher, which made the kitchen hotter, but the dining room almost glow. We changed the menu with the season, like always. I added a chilled beet gazpacho with pickled strawberries and goat cheese crema. My mother didn't understand it. "Cold soup?" she asked, wrinkling her nose. But she ate 3 spoonfuls and nodded slowly. Still weird, but good. That was her way of saying she liked it. Marco and I started training 2 new line cooks. One of them, Gabby, had come from a food truck in San Bernardino. She was quiet but sharp, her knife cuts clean and even. The other, Amir, was chaos incarnate. He danced while he cooked, left coriander seeds in his pockets, and talked about every dish like it was a love affair. I like them both, but they didn't know me yet. Not really. One afternoon, Gabby came up behind me as I adjusted microgreens on a lamb tostada and asked, "Chef, were you always like this good? Or did it take you forever?" I looked up. Her eyes weren't sarcastic, just hopeful. "It took a long time," I said. "Longer than it should have. Mostly because I didn't believe I belonged." She tilted her head. Even now I didn't answer. Because the truth was, yes, sometimes. Even now. That night, I went home and opened a dusty bin from the back of my closet. Inside were old journals. Not recipes. Not plans. Just my thoughts. From years I barely remembered surviving. Years of sweat-stained shirts, second jobs, and walking home from late shifts with sore feet and $13 in tips. I flipped through one dated January 2013. Mom said I'm wasting time again, said I could still enroll in dental tech classes. I didn't answer. I just cleaned the sink and left. Sometimes I wonder if I'm making all this up if I really have any talent, or if I'm just chasing a version of myself I can't ever catch. Another from August 2014. The sous chef forgot my name again today. Called me the girl with the mole sauce. At least he remembers the sauce. And one more. From a night I didn't even recall writing, "I want someone to taste what I make and cry." Not because it's sad, but because it reminds them they're still alive. I closed the journal and leaned back against the couch. The room dark except for the streetlight outside painting gold lines through the blinds. Maybe that's all I ever wanted. Not fame. Not validation. Just for someone to eat what I made and feel something. And now people cried in my restaurant all the time. Over food, over memory, over quiet things they didn't have words for. I never asked why. I just passed them a napkin and let the silence hold them. One Saturday afternoon, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. When I answered, the voice on the other end was hesitant. "Is this Marisol Vega, the chef?" "Yes. This is Serena Gutierrez. I'm your cousin." I froze. Serena. She was Aunt Lita's daughter, the one who used to braid my hair at family barbecues when we were kids. We hadn't spoken in over 10 years. Not since her parents moved up north and stopped coming to family holidays. "I saw you in a magazine," she said. "Your face." I almost didn't believe it. "I remember you used to bring those weird sandwiches to school." I laughed. Sun-dried tomato and goat cheese. I thought I was being fancy. "You were." She chuckled. "And ahead of your time?" There was a pause. "I'm reaching out because we're having a family reunion. Next month. In Oxnard. I know it's been a while, but everyone would really like it if you came." I almost said no. The old reflexes kicked in the ache of past rejections, the fear of being side-eyed and whispered about, the memory of Tanya's laugh echoing off the dining room walls. But then I thought about my mother, about her soft smile behind the counter, about the way she now introduced me to her friends as my daughter, the chef, no longer saying it with caution, but with pride. I took a breath. "I'll come," I said. The reunion was held in a rented community hall near the beach, folding tables with checkered tablecloths, foil trays of rice and beans, a bounce house in the corner for the kids. I showed up in jeans and a linen shirt, hair pulled back, no chef's coat, no press badge. Just me. Some people recognized me right away. Others needed Serena to whisper in their ear, "That's Marisol." Yes, that Marisol. Tanya was there. She hugged me stiff, awkward, and said, "I still tell people you're my cousin. You know, bragging rights." I smiled. "I remember you used to say I was trying too hard." Her face flushed. "I was kind of a jerk back then." "Kind of," I said, then laughed. We sat together for a while. She told me she ran a small business now, handmade candles. She said they weren't Michelin level, but they paid the bills. Then she leaned in, quieter. My mom's sick, she said. We didn't think she'd make it to the reunion, but she wanted to see everyone, especially you. Me. She asked if you'd bring something. Something you made. Said she'd know it was you by the way it tasted. I had brought a basket of conchas. My mother's version, the ones we'd made together in the old Pan Dulce kitchen. I handed one to Tanya. She brought it to her mom. I watched as Aunt Lita took a bite. She didn't say anything, just closed her eyes, then nodded. I didn't cry, but something in me loosened like a knot that had been waiting years to untangle. Later, after most of the crowd had thinned, I walked down to the beach alone. The sun was low, the tide soft. I kicked off my shoes and let my toes dig into the sand. The waves rolled in, steady, like breath. And I realized I wasn't angry anymore, not at the family who mocked me, not at the teachers who told me cooking wasn't real work, not even at myself, for believing them. I had carried all that weight for so long, mistaking it for identity, for fire. But maybe it wasn't fire I needed. Maybe it was release. I looked out over the ocean and whispered, "Thank you." Not to anyone, just to the moment, to the silence, to the long, winding path that brought me here, to the hands that shaped the dough, and the hands that shaped me. When I walked back toward the hall, my mother was standing outside waiting. She held a plastic container in her hands. "I saved you a plate," she said. I opened it. Tamales, rice, one of Tanya's weird corn casseroles, and at the very top, a slice of my chocolate tart. I looked at her. She just nodded. "I told them it was yours this time," she said. No one argued. We stood together under the fading light. No words, no noise, just warmth, a kind I used to chase. Now, it stood beside me. Fall crept in with the smell of roasted chilies and wet pavement. The heat didn't vanish completely. It never does in Los Angeles. But there was a soft edge to the days now. Mornings felt cooler. The air had that sharpness that made you crave broth. Slow braised meat. Bowls held close to your chest. At La Senda, we started prepping for Dia de los Muertos. We always honored it quietly, no themed costumes or photo booths. Just an altar in the corner near the kitchen window. My staff added photos of their loved ones, grandmothers, tios, childhood pets. Someone brought a Polaroid of a father holding a taco with both hands, grinning with greasy cheeks. I added 2 photos this year, one of my abuela young, proud, wearing a red apron in the backyard kitchen of her house in Michoacan, and next to it, a photo I found in a shoebox, me and my mom at a county fair, both holding corn dogs, both caught mid-laugh. I must have been 8. When I pinned that one up, something inside me steadied. A week later, she asked if she could cook with me again, just for the holiday. She said, "I'll stay out of your way." I didn't want her out of my way. I wanted her right next to me. So we spent the day before the ofrenda dinner elbow deep in masa, rolling tamales and telling stories. The kitchen buzzed around us, Gabby prepping mole negro, Amir roasting plantains for dessert. But it felt like our own small world in the corner. "Do you remember the Halloween you tried to turn enchiladas into candy?" my mom asked. I laughed. "I put chocolate chips in the sauce. You cried when we wouldn't eat it. I was ahead of my time. You were ridiculous." We both smiled. But then she paused. "I didn't know how to handle you back then," she said. "You were always reaching for something. I was afraid you'd get hurt. Or worse, disappointed." I did get hurt. I know. I looked over at her. She wasn't crying. She wasn't even looking at me, just folding tamales. slow and precise. But I healed, I said, because I kept reaching. She nodded, still not meeting my eyes. And now look, they reach for you. That line sat with me the rest of the day. The Ofrenda dinner sold out in hours. We dimmed the lights, lit candles across every table, placed marigolds at the center of the room. The air smelled like burnt sugar and cumin and memory. I stepped out mid-service to look around. Couples leaned into each other, sipping mezcal cocktails. Older guests teared up at the altar. A young woman in a black dress knelt in front of my grandmother's photo and whispered something I couldn't hear. When I turned, my mother was watching me from the pass. She raised her glass. I raised mine. We didn't need to say anything. By November, a publisher had reached out. They wanted to talk about a cookbook. I'd never thought about writing one. Not seriously. I always figured cookbooks were for chefs who had slick PR teams and kitchens full of lighting equipment. But they said they didn't want just recipes. They wanted my story, not the glamorous parts. The editor told me, the silence, the fight. The girl who made chocolate tarts no one touched. I laughed when she said that. It wasn't a sad laugh. It was the kind of laugh that only comes when the pain has finally moved far enough behind you that you can see the shape it left. I said I'd think about it. But the truth is, I already knew I'd say yes. That night, I found myself back in the same kitchen chair I'd sat in months ago after Thanksgiving. Lights off, feet bare, one hand wrapped around a cup of warm atoll my mother had dropped off just because. And in the quiet, I thought about all the moments that brought me here, the ignored dishes, the burns on my arms, the apartment that smelled like onions for years, the long walks home from night shifts, whispering recipes to myself like prayers. I thought about the first time I plated a dish and knew it was mine. I thought about the night my mother called me chef, and I let those memories sit beside me. Not like ghosts, but like old friends who had finally stopped shouting and started listening. Later that week, I taught a class, just a small one, 12 students from a community center in Boyle Heights, mostly teenagers, some single moms. They asked me how to make good arroz. I told them, start with listening. They laughed. One girl said, to what rice? Yes, I said. It tells you when it's ready. It sounds different, smells different. The whole kitchen changes. That confused them, but they kept stirring. At the end, we all sat and ate together. They didn't say much, but they scraped their plates clean. Before I left, one of the students, a boy named Isaias, came up and asked, do you think someone like me could be a chef? I crouched down to his level. What does someone like you mean? He hesitated. No one at home really cares about food. They just want fast stuff. They don't get it when I try to make it nice. I smiled. Then yes. Especially someone like you. He grinned and ran back to his seat. And I stood there, heart too full to speak. On Thanksgiving, I didn't go to my mother's house. She came to mine. My apartment was small, but the table was full. Marco brought his boyfriend. Janelle came with her baby. Amir showed up late with a bottle of orange wine and a beet pie that tasted better than it looked. We didn't have turkey. We had pozole, and my mother's tamales, and my chocolate tart, which everyone asked for seconds of. Halfway through dinner, Lucas stood and clinked his glass. I just want to say, he began, already emotional, that last year. We didn't know what we were doing. We didn't see you clearly, Murray, but now we do. My mom added softly, we always wanted to. We just didn't know how. I felt the heat behind my eyes, but I didn't cry. I just stood, raised my glass, and said, I forgive you. And I meant it. Not because they asked, but because I no longer needed the weight. Later, as the guests trickled out, My mom stayed behind to help with dishes. We stood side by side at the sink, like we had so many times before. "I want to learn that tart," she said. "For next year." "You sure?" She nodded. "If we're going to pass something down, it should be yours." That night, after she left, I wrote the recipe down by hand, carefully, every measurement, every note, every small instruction about temperature, texture, and timing. At the top, I wrote Vega chocolate tart, the one they finally ate. I slid it into a clean folder, labeled it for Mom, and tucked it in the same drawer where I once kept my first recipes next to the old journals, the faded dreams, and the notes that once kept me alive. The next morning, I went to La Senda early. The city was still quiet. I opened the door, let the light flood in, and stood there for a moment, taking it all in. The empty chairs, the clean counters, the altar, still glowing with marigolds. And I breathed, not to brace myself, but to fill myself. This place, this life was mine, not perfect, but real, built with flour, fire, and grace. And finally, full.